Guys, welcome to this episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. I've got our very first and very special guest, Mr. Alex Ebenstein here with me today. How you doing, Alex?
Doing great. How you doing?
Good, man. I'm really excited to see you here. Last time we saw each other was at StokerCon in Pittsburgh, and you were in the exhibitor room, right?
Yeah. Yep. Selling books.
Selling books. And I was walking around, with my little tag on, my backpack, weighing me down. Probably, I think my backpack weighed more than I did at that point because of all the books. And by the way, if anyone listening to this has not been to a big event in the fiction space like StokerCon, just a warning that when you go into that room where everyone's selling books, you're gonna walk out with like enough weight in books equal to your body weight. It worked out for me because I had a truck in the parking lot, so I could like go out there and I could put my books in there and then come back in. But man, I would have been in trouble if I had to lug those things around all day. But um, that's when I met you. Was at your sales table, and I loved the cover of Curse Corvus, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. And I was like, "Oh, this looks great!" And we got to meet each other a little bit, and I have an affinity for indie publishers and small prints. So it was really cool to just meet you and the other guys there. And who else did you have like next to you? Because you guys were kind of all teamed up, right?
Yeah, we shared a table. So I currently run a small press, Dreadstone Press, and obviously I have my own work that I was promoting. Shared a table with a couple friends who run Hungry Shadow Press and Cursed Morsels Press.
Awesome.
Close
Yeah,
friends.
that was super cool to be able to kind of meet all you guys at the same time, and see what you guys had going on. And I love the formats of the books because you had like collaborations,
Mhm.
not just single author books, not solo efforts, and also not like, you see a lot of anthologies in our space. So I thought that was really cool that you were able to showcase multiple authors outside of the anthology space there. Um, and I might just get like really excited about things that because I'm a nerd for books. So I'm like, oh, this is great. So if you're listening to this and you guys are like, dude, come on, like it's not that big a deal. It is that freaking cool, man. It is that big a deal. So Alex, I want to start getting to, we'll talk a little bit more about you and then we'll talk about the stories because I feel like as a reader, it was always super cool for me to be able to connect with writers that I enjoy their work. So getting to know about them a little bit, getting to know about their life, where they're at, what they're doing, what's going on with them, really kind of deepened my experience as a reader. So now that I'm a writer, I try to share that same perspective with people on the podcast, people that maybe are checking out the Substack, where I publish some reflections on what's going on in fiction. Um, Tell me a little bit about you, like what's going on for you with in life outside of writing.
Yeah, so I'm a Michigander, born and raised, never left. Which I sometimes I regret not not leaving the state and exploring, but I love it here. Despite the fact that I don't generally like winter, um, we do have seasons, and it's nice to have that perspective with a seasonal shift. Not to get into the weather talk, but yeah, I'm from Michigan. My family's here too, so it's all just always been here. Got a wife and a almost 4 year old and a dog, and it's kind of doing the thing. I got a day job making maps for a local city, and that's pretty much my whole life. When you got a 4 year old and a dog and a full time job and attempt to write and attempt to publish it, that's a lot.
Well, I'm not, I hope you take this like I intend to send it. Like you aren't just attempting to, you are doing those things. And
Yeah.
that's like a big deal because I'm a father, I've got three kids, and like you have, I've got work going on in life. And I think that sometimes people use that as a reason not to achieve things they aspire to.
Yeah.
Nah, dude, you're doing it. You're knocking it out of the park too, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you today. I think, the stuff you're producing is fantastic. I'd shared with you before we got on that I'm reading Curse Corvus and I'm really enjoying it. I've got some notes I'll go over with you when we get to that part. But I want to dig in a little bit more about like how you got here, right? So like, where did your love for suspenseful fiction come from? Like, was it passed to you by other members of your family? Were you just like, did you find it? Like, how did this come about?
Yeah, so I would say just kind of it was hard to avoid it growing up. Both my parents are voracious readers, always have been, and so me and my siblings we read a lot too growing up. But it just someone in the house was always reading, and that goes a long way. When you see your parents growing up, you see them always reading books. It has an impact on you. At least it did on me. And both my parents were and still are big Stephen King fans. So that's the easy answer. But they grew up reading Stephen King, and beyond that, kind of in that same vein, under the umbrella of suspense, my dad read a lot of like thriller books. So like Michael Crichton type of techno thriller, and so just growing up, kind of being exposed to that, not necessarily reading that at a super young age, but it was there. Like I don't have that backstory of, I read my first Stephen King book when I was 7, but it was always there. And I read Goosebumps books, and certainly that's an in to the the horror world. But yeah, I mean, I got into Stephen King. I'd been reading Michael Crichton and got into Stephen King, and just kind of like, I like this. I'm just gonna keep reading it. So yeah, it was that, and I can remember. It's funny because I was just last night I was watching an old episode of X-Files, and it reminded me that when I was a very young boy, my parents would watch the X-Files, and I don't remember the episode, but I have a very specific memory of like sneaking back down the hall after I was supposed to be in bed and just like peeking around the corner, and they're watching X-Files. It's scary. There's some very
it's funny though.
Very suspenseful, and huge fan of the X-Files. Since I've gone back and watched the whole series through a couple times.
I was just listening to another podcast, and the author they were interviewing was talking about how pivotal X-Files was in their development. And I never watched the show, and I was there when it was happening, man. Like it was in the 90s. I was a teenager, like friends of mine were watching it, and I was like just distracted. I remember like people just being obsessed with it. So now I feel like I have to catch up, and get into the X-Files now, and figure out what I missed, because I completely missed it.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm biased because I've basically always loved it, but it still really holds up. There's a little bit of that. Okay, it came out in the it was the 90s, right? Like throughout the 90s.
Absolutely.
But it still is you can't good writing, it can't really go out of style or out of date, right? So like they're wearing the clothes of the 90s. The cell phones are the size of like
bricks
in my head, but yeah, it's I recommend going back to it. I mean, there are 11 seasons or 12 seasons, I don't know, there are far too many that you really need to see, but go back and like watch a couple seasons or something. You'll find some good stuff in there.
I can't wait. I mean, eventually I'll run out of the list of things to watch that I currently have pinned down on. Unlike books, I actually run out of things to watch because I don't put too much on that list, and I don't get as much time to watch as I want to.
Sure,
We've kind of used I've used my fiction writing as an excuse and a reason, I guess, more so than an excuse, to try and get back into watching more film. Especially adaptations of fiction, because it is so pivotal. I mean, I look back at what I was doing when I was a kid and the things that I was enjoying about my childhood, and that's both as a kind of like a young kid and as a teen, and it was like a handshake between reading fiction and watching it. So I'm all about that, keeping that alive, and I'm gonna have to add it. It's going to have to go on the list now. You're the second person this week that's been like, I have to watch the X-Files.
It's a sign. Yeah.
It is a sign.
Yeah.
So what about writing? Like, when did you start writing? Were you writing young, as a teen or as a child, or was it more so something you picked up later as an adult?
Yeah, so definitely the latter. I don't have similar to the Stephen King at a young age. I wasn't I didn't write when I was younger. I mean, outside of like school stuff. And I took a class in high school that was like science of science fiction, and we were asked to write something. But I mean, that's the extent of it. I didn't really have that much interest in it, which is kind of odd considering I read as much as I did at that time. But it really wasn't until after grad school, or I guess during grad school, I'd written my thesis and got it done early, which kind of sounds like humble bragging or something. But I managed to get it done early, so I had a couple months of grad school where I had very little to do, and I was like, you know what, I wrote all those words for that thesis, and it was actually kind of fun. But I bet if I write something like
Yes.
that's fun, it'll be even more fun, and um, so that was kind of it. I started thinking maybe I want to try this. So I wrote a couple really, really terrible short stories, and then over the course of a couple years, like I got my first real job out of college,
Hmm.
and that took up a lot of my time. But then when I moved to where I live now, um, I decided, you know what, I've been dabbling a little bit, and I'm gonna do this. So this was
Hmm.
about 6 years ago now. I thought I'm just gonna write a novel, and I
Like right
did.
out the gate.
Yeah. I mean, I had a couple short stories that were just not good at all, and then I started writing a novel, and 5 months later, I had about 100,000 words, um, and a novel that still hasn't seen the light of day, and probably for the best. I've gone back through it a few times, and I think it could probably stand to never be seen again, or like a complete rewrite. And I really like the concept of that original novel, but who knows? The first attempt, there's a lot in there that needs. I mean, I'm a completely different writer now than I was then. I was just getting started. So
Absolutely. I was getting ready to say, I'm like smiling as you're saying that, because I found a bunch of stuff I wrote when I was a teen. I was a
mhm.
very active writer from a very young age. And when I became a teenager, I just like couldn't stop writing. But man, was it bad. Like, I'm reading some of this stuff now and I'm like, oh my God. I shared with you before the show that I was a musician for a few years. So naturally I was thinking, well, maybe I should be writing music, right? So I was writing lyrics and they were so bad. I was reading them. I'm like, oh my God, thank God I never recorded any of this, because I'd have to answer for it now. And if I don't want this stuff to never see the light of day, well, it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm. Yeah.
we'll just say that stuff for when, you're just world famous and
Oh,
people
sure.
are
Yeah.
clamoring to get anything with your name on it. And you could be like, hey, here's something ridiculous I put out a couple years back. It's not great, but whatever. And then everyone will buy it up. And
Yeah. Here's a trunk novel.
yeah, there you go.
Um,
Well, that's cool, man. So like, so one last question about your kind of your path to where you to getting here. So you said you went to school. What did you study in school?
yeah. So I ended up going to undergrad and got a degree in environmental science,
Hmm.
essentially, is what it is. And through that degree, I found a kind of somewhat niche field of computer mapping. And there are a lot of weeds that we could get into there, but suffice it to say, I found out that a past love of engineering, I could kind of translate into this mapping, making maps. It really struck a chord with me, and so I went to grad school specifically for that. It was a geography program, but focused on that, and yeah, that's what I still do now. So I've been doing that for between school and my actual job, about 10 years of that, and actually a little
Excellent.
bit more than that now. But um, yeah, it's good. I like it. I'm good at it, and I'm finally at a point now where I can start to be creative. I can start
Mm.
to make maps that are less functional. Well, they're functional because it's government, so it has to be functional. But
Sure.
trying to find ways where I can start to be a little more artistic and do that. So that's been a fun, like somewhat recent, like within the last year or two, like going, okay, I can use Adobe Illustrator and start like playing around and making them aesthetically pleasing as opposed to just simply functional. So,
I love that. You know, I'm an engineer, so
oh
that's
yeah,
my background is engineering. I did industrial engineering as an undergrad, then systems engineering as a grad school student, and then got my doctorate in systems engineering, and still teach in the engineering management and systems engineering department at Old Dominion University. Just like one class a semester. It's nothing crazy. But the only reason I'm bringing that up is to say that I think there's a lot of people that assume that the logic-minded engineering types, like science types, don't like it's oil and water when it comes to artistic
mm-hmm.
writing, all that thing. And I am completely of the opposite opinion because I feel like and oftentimes I find very creative engineers and they're going into engineering or they love engineering or they go into these technical fields because they love creating something. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just another way of doing it because they also have a bit of a bend in their mind that pulls them towards those logical career paths as well. When I say logical career paths, I don't mean logic as far as the career, but like the focus of the careers are logic-based
Yes,
studies, right?
yes, absolutely, completely agree.
Very cool, man. Well, see, look at that, dude. I didn't even know that before we got started, and here you are, just blowing up the box of assumptions that a lot of people walk in with. I love that. So now you're writing and you're doing the dad thing and the work thing. So I've got to ask, am I seeing your typical writing environment right now on this video, on this call, or do you have like what's your typical writing environment like?
Yeah, I would say the office that I'm in, the house that we bought, I was fortunate enough to have a room where I could dedicate to my office. I've got obviously you can't see the other side, but I'm sitting at a desk and I've got my bookshelves behind me, and um, yeah, I would say the vast majority of the time this is where I'm writing because I can close the door and I can just kind of descend to the basement office, when everyone else in the house is sleeping, and um, sometimes you write wherever. But I've never been like a big like coffee shop writer, or which
Yeah.
I have done that before, but yeah, this is my space right here where I do my writing, my publishing, like, yeah, right here.
It's funny you mentioned the coffee shop thing because I am also a home office kind of writer guy. My big deviation from this little desk I'm sitting at right now is if I go work on my laptop in like the living
Mhm.
room,
Sure.
like because I'm old and my back sometimes isn't happy with me sitting for a long period, so I'll go stand at the bar and I always wonder like, dude, if my readers could know where I'm standing right now, they'd be like, this is not necessarily reflective of the story you're writing, dude. And then the second part of that is I had to go write in a coffee shop for the first time in like 2 or 3 years yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yep. So my son had something going on across town, and it was kind of sudden. And he's 16, so of course it's sudden. And he's like, "Hey, can you do this?" Sure. Pack up my laptop, run across town, and I hung out in the Barnes and Noble, and it was kind of fun. I was like, "Wait, I feel like this
Yeah.
is like a more typical writer thing to be doing right now." I'm sitting
Yeah.
in the Starbucks with my cup of coffee and I'm at the window looking out and there's people. I'm not usually writing around anyone.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't
Yeah, it was
it?
really odd to be out in society while writing a story about burying children. So, so the title of the story is Bury the Child. So
Okay.
yeah, I
Okay.
can't give any spoilers away unless you're reading my beta rollout on Substack. You're probably going, what the heck? But yeah, it was just a different environment. So I'm very interested in people's writing environments because I
Mhm.
think that we have so much more freedom with that today than we ever did
Oh, sure.
before. You know, the technology is better, the tools and implementation is better. I mean, it's all better. So, yeah, did I grow up in a house with a typewriter? Sure. Like we had the first electronic typewriter. Remember when they brought that in the house? I was like, what is that thing? And my mom was all proud of this electronic typewriter she had. And I remember thinking, you have to put that on a piece of furniture and then it has to stay there.
Mm.
And my dad's like, no, dude, it's got a case with a handle. And I was like, what? It's so mind blowing. And then, being a child of the 80s and 90s, like then we had PCs and then we had all these things. And now it's like, yeah, I just grab my little laptop and run anywhere in the world. So,
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, it's, thanks for sharing where you're writing, and that's super cool to your readers, I'm sure. I got to ask though, I brought up that I used to be a musician, so obviously I'm a huge fan of music, and I feel like it's inseparable for me. My writing and my music is kind of conjoined, whether I like it or not. So, is there any music that inspires your writing, or do you have like a particular type of music you listen to, or are you like, I need silence while I write kind of guy?
All of the above. um, I I would say I almost always start listening to something and then usually write to music. Although there are definitely times where I'm sitting here and just like even and it's typically soundtrack like film soundtracks and
Yep.
just no words because I have a bad tendency to want to sing along to the songs that I'm listening to. Um, but even that, sometimes I've been finding I, I've been struggling writing the last few months, just in general.
Sure.
And when I've been sitting down to write, I've been finding that my mind is a little bit too like it's struggling to focus. And even just the soundtracks, it's like too loud, and I'll turn it down. I'm like, what am I even doing? Just turn it off. And so I've been kind of writing a little bit more recently without anything. But
Hmm.
I like to write to to film scores. Um, Jurassic Park soundtrack is an absolute go to. I mean, since college, that would be like the
Dude.
oh, I need to write a paper, put on the Jurassic Park soundtrack, grab a beer and some pretzels, and get going. Like that was the thing.
I got to write that down. I've never used the Jurassic Park sound. Now you got me really curious. I got to go check this out.
Well, it's my favorite movie of all time, so that's part of it. And there are a few, so like several of trying to think like the John Williams soundtracks, like Jurassic Park, like Indiana Jones, and um, some of the like Hans Zimmer, like Inception, Interstellar type things. You see a movie enough, or you hear the soundtrack enough, you can almost visualize the movie as you. I mean, I can if I'm listening to Jurassic Park, like I know the whole thing front to back, basically just listening to the music. The tricky part, I should say, is now I'll listen to Jurassic Park and I'll get like one track into it and go, I just want to turn it on. I just want to watch the movie now, and I have to fight that urge. Like, you're writing, you're writing. You're not watching movies right now. You're writing.
Yeah, and then your spouse comes down and she's like, "What are you doing, dude?" Like, yeah.
Yeah, oh, you're writing. Yeah, you know me watching Jurassic Park for the fourth time this year.
Yeah, where's your chapter, dude? You're supposed to have a chapter done and you're over here watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I'm a big fan of like Danny Elfman. Anything Danny
Oh
Elfman
yeah.
composed is like it's on, it's playing. Lately it's been Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, cool.
Um, but it's kind of odd for me to write sometimes during this time of year with those soundtracks because it's so freaking hot here in Southeast Virginia. And I'm like,
Okay.
you know, but I tend to write, well, before this last month, I was writing a lot at night. So,
Yeah.
so it was a little different, but people are probably wondering what the heck that has to do with my office. But like when it's all blacked out, it's dark outside. I've gone outside with the dog and we've hung out. I've got that soundtrack going. I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go write, dude. Let's get this done.
Yeah.
But one thing I've noticed that has become a problem for me that I didn't have before was I used to write such, I would say I wrote shorter pieces back then. I could write for 45 minutes to an hour, one soundtrack, and I was good to go. But now I sit for 3 to 4 hours to write a chapter,
Oh,
and I'm like blowing through like so, so YouTube Music's become my best friend because it's like just on a like a rolling stream, it's like next,
oh yeah.
next, next, next.
I will. I'll add quick too that a couple of times. So there was a shorter novel that I wrote last year, over the last couple of years, and I I the music wasn't working, so I for that one I just pulled up like a 10-hour YouTube video of just like it. The story is set in winter in like this Hallmark holiday type uh, town, and so I just like had this blizzard sounds, wind blowing, and just like had it up on my second screen. So like all I'm seeing is just like snow, and like okay, this is kind of getting me into that like the sound
Yeah.
of winter. And so sometimes I do that. Like I don't do that all the time, and not all my stories necessarily require like immersing myself in the setting like that. But I do I do that sometimes, or like there's like a
It
sometimes
does help.
rain, thunderstorms, and stuff like that is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, sometimes it just adds that little layer of inspiration or
Mhm.
like pulls you in just a little bit more. I could listen to one soundtrack while I'm writing one type of story, and I cannot listen to that while I'm writing the next one. And when I work at my desk, because, like I was telling you before, I own a couple of training businesses. When I'm here working on my business stuff, it's like really aggressive metal the whole time. And then I have to shift, like, I'm like, okay, I have to shift focus. I have to go write this really sappy, horrific story. I can't be listening to this high energy kind of stuff that makes me want to get up and roll.
Yeah.
So that's good, man. Now, see, that's really cool. Like, and look at that. Now I got to go check out the Jurassic Park soundtrack, John Williams, Interstellar. I got the whole list going now.
Oh yeah.
So
Cool.
awesome, man. So tell me a little bit about. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about Curse Corvus.
Okay.
This was my first exposure to your writing. There you go. First of all, love the cover.
Yeah.
Love the cover. Had no clue what the heck was going on here when I first saw the book. Then I start reading it, and I'm like, oh, okay, got it. Which I've got some questions about, but no spoilers, people. So if you're here for the story, or and you haven't read the book, you're still gonna have to read the book. We're not gonna spoil it for you, but and if you haven't read it, you'll have a fresh read. But I was drawn to the artwork. I shared your book on an Instagram post this last week, and immediately the first response I got was, "Dude, I love that cover."
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was from a buddy of mine who's a drummer and screenwriter out in LA.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Didn't know what was this in this little package here at the bottom. It's like, what is that? And you get into not you don't have to go very far in the book to figure that out. And you're like, dude, that's I did not expect that. So really cool.
Yeah. I've been hearing that a lot since the book came out, and actually since I revealed the cover. And um, I think we all know by now, covers do sell. You do absolutely judge books by the cover.
Yep.
And I am very fortunate with the illustrator that I worked with, Evangeline Gallagher. They are just incredible. Huge fan. And when I reached out to Evangeline with the idea, and maybe we'll get into this in a minute, but the cover is based on a real thing that happened to my sister and her roommate. And we can talk about that in a minute. But so anyway, the point of that being, I had a photo that is very similar to what this is that
No
happened
way.
in real life. And then Evangeline came back with this cover and just absolutely nailed it with their flair and their style, of course. But just it's perfect. It's perfect for the story. It's eye catching, and constantly people, oh, that is really, like, just love the cover, want to know what's going on. Um, the classic, oh, I picked this up, or I was interested because of the cover, and that's the point. That's the whole point. That's what you want.
Well, you blew my mind a little bit. I probably did a really poor job of hiding it. You would never guess that I used to work with like intelligence gathering and stuff because I'm like, I'm over here showing all my emotions are on my sleeve right now. Because when you said that, it answered one of the questions I had about the book later. It was like, where did you get this idea about this dress and this bundled thing
Mm-hmm.
on this? I was like, because I'm, of course, as a fellow writer, but almost more so as a fellow reader, I'm like looking for inspiration in your story. I'm looking for unique ideas and twists and turns. And I've got some comments on your writing style, which I thought was great, all these different things. But the one thing I couldn't answer for myself, because, as we were talking about before, I've gotten two-thirds of the way through the book. The one thing I could not figure out for the life of me was where did he get the inspiration for this cover, and that is kind of the foundation of the story. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about what the story is about without blowing the whole world's minds here with don't tell us the ending.
Yeah, absolutely. So I stole it,
Good.
which is the flippant answer. But the dedication is for Lydia and Victoria for letting me steal your story. So that is my sister and her roommate. And it was a situation where they had a personal experience that coincided with a different sort of kernel of an idea that I had in it, and I realized I wanted to put them together. And and I'll just kind of get into those real quick.
Hmm.
The things that I had seen for whatever reason, just around my yard, like coming across like um, dead birds. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
But it was really creepy, and like just the way they were that I found them, not just like baby birds. And so anyway, that just been in my head. I'm like, wow, that's a really creepy thing, and maybe there's some kind of story there. And then in April of 2020, my sister and her roommate went out hiking. So I live in the west side of Michigan, by near the lakeshore by Lake Michigan, and so we have dunes all up and down the lakeshore, and several county and state parks, and lots of like recreational like hiking opportunities. And my sister and roommate, they love doing that. So anyway, they went for a hike, just like a Saturday or something in April. Actually it was April Fool's Day. Um, Went out to this park by the lakeshore. We're hiking through the dunes, and they're going down by the water, and like, what is that like on the distance? And they get closer, and sure enough, it's a wedding dress hanging from essentially a signpost, just flapping in the wind. And this is really weird. And they just kind of looking around. There's no one around. They're the only people there. It was the height of COVID at the time, and just they were out just trying to get fresh air. And so they get close to it, and there's no one around. And there's this dress, and at the bottom is like a floral print like sheet bundled up at the base. And I won't spoil what was in it because that's part of the story. But
Yeah.
they opened it, and it was the thing that's in the book.
Really?
And they were just like, what is going on? Is this a prank? Is this some kind of like occultish like ritual thing? Like what's going on here? And they were freaked out, but they're like, well, should we call someone? And the parks were all closed because of COVID, and so they ended up calling like the non-emergency police, like whatever that number.
Just calling the station.
Not 911, but
Right.
the like local police, and like, hey, just we found this, don't know what if anything needs to happen. So they did. They waited for a little bit, and then eventually they left. But she had documented it and like created a whole bunch of a story on Instagram, and I saw those pictures, and I texted her. I said, hey, can I use that for a story? Like, I've got this other idea, and I think they get kind of work together. And she's like, oh yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be so cool. And yeah, and that was it. That's how it all started. The two characters in the book, Lindsay and Val, L and V, the initial. I mean, I absolutely stole their story, but
I was just getting ready to ask about that because I mean, until you mentioned it, because I did see your dedication, and but I hadn't read a word of the story yet, so I was like,
yeah,
okay, how did he steal this story from these two people? And obviously, they know each other well, and it must be a little bit of an inside joke because why would you tell someone on the first page of your book that you're stealing their story?
yeah, right.
So I thought that was cool. I was like, oh, there must be a really cool story behind that. Dude, I had no idea it was that cool a story. Like it is really like having read this, part through all this, that's kind of blown my mind a little bit.
Well, it's funny because you know how like you see movies are based on a true story, and it's usually like the absolute loosest, like tiniest kernel of truth possible. But hey, I can say that my Curse Corvus is based on a true story. I mean, granted, everything after like the first chapter and a half, or maybe two chapters, is completely fictitious, of course. And the characters within do not reflect actually my sister and her friend. They are both very good, nice people, and they don't do evil things. So just get that out of the way. But yeah, it's based on a true story. So I had one of my sister's photos again was I sent that to Evangeline, and that became kind of that final cover. And yeah, it's been that was it. And that was like my first novella that I wrote. So it helped to have a little bit of a launch pad for that, because I'm not the type to just like, come up with an idea. Like I know some people who are idea machines. They just pump out ideas left and right, which is great, but that's not me. I need to have some things kind of come to me and like piece themselves together at the right time. And that was the case for this. I had that bird thing, and then my sister's experience, and just they kind of came together. And I thought, oh, I know what I could do with this, and it became Curse Corvus.
Well, I mean, you can see my response. I think that, don't take away from the fact that, having that type of inspiration for you, I know it can be difficult because it can be frustrating when you're trying to come up with a good story or whatever, but think about how cool it was that you have that much strength behind the inspiration when it does happen. It's like, dude,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty impressive. Um, I don't know why you titled it the way you did yet, and I'm afraid to ask because like I
Okay.
said, I'm 2/3 of the way through the book, and I don't know if that's a spoiler or not, but I am curious about that, and I'm
Yeah,
hoping
you'll get
that,
there soon. You'll
yeah,
get
I'll get there soon.
there. Mm-hmm.
So if I'm asking that question and not wanting to know the answer, then reader, listener, whoever you are, you need to pick up this book and join me to find the reason behind the title. Because that was one of the first things that caught my attention when I saw your book. I was like, interesting title.
Yeah,
Very
and
interesting title.
I'm terrible with titles. I self-proclaimed bad titler. But with that, it kind of plays out in the book, and it seemed unique enough
Mm.
that it would be someone might question and go, "What does that mean?" And hopefully to go along with the cover itself enough for someone to pick it up.
Yeah, I thought it might be a name. Like, it might be like Curse is someone's first name and their last name
Mhm.
is Corvus, just because Corvus is so unique. And
Yeah,
I thought, well, it would be kind of cool to be named Curse in a
I
bad
mean,
way. But that was my very uneducated guess when I saw the book at StokerCon. So what theme inspired, or sorry, what theme do you aspire to convey in the book? One of the things my book coach is adamant about, that's Zach Bohannon, we talked a little bit about beforehand. Zach was really good about when I first started writing like a novel or a novel. He's like, dude, we have to identify what your theme is, whether we do it now in the beginning or we do it a little bit later on. Theme is really important. I underestimated that, just because I guess I'm not an I'm a fairly easy reader to please because I
same.
just love a good story,
Yeah,
right?
same.
Like it's a good story and it's written well. I'm gonna enjoy it. But the whole concept, the theme is fascinating to me. So is there a theme that you aspired to convey in the book?
So I would say that I like you. If I can read a story, a book, anything, and have a good time with it, feel like it wasn't a waste of my time, and it feels like a story with depth to it, I'm happy. I don't necessarily need to know the themes. If they're there and I catch them, great. I mean, there's a reason why thematic elements are talked about and important. But I say that because I don't set out. Generally speaking, it's pretty rare for me to set out writing anything with a or let alone multiple themes in mind.
Hmm.
And it's typically a see what shakes out at the end, which
Hmm.
I don't know. You can do it either way.
Yep.
I prefer it that way. I'd rather kind of get the natural theme that plays out in what your subconscious as you're writing it versus kind of hitting it over the head with a hammer with it. But
Yeah.
both can be done very well. So there's I would never there's no always, there's no never, there's no no don't do this. But for me
Hmm.
personally, um, yeah, it's kind of what shakes out, and I think I hadn't really quite identified it until I worked with the editor, that Alex Woodrow. She kind of helped with the back cover copy, and we use the words fevered pursuit of happiness and toxic positivity. And I, if anything, those are it, right? Those are kind of the what it's one thing to want to be happy, but when you pursue it at all costs, generally speaking, the cost of others,
It's pretty impactful.
yeah, and then just
Yeah.
that idea of toxic positivity, that
I
it's
don't I don't think I realized that Alex had edited the book.
yeah, yep, yeah, she is an incredible editor, just flat out, and a friend, and I had reached out and said, hey, can I hire you to help me clean this up? And so I had mentioned it kind of in my appreciation post when the book came out, and I thanked her in the acknowledgments. But when I first wrote the book, it was the first novella, and I had been trying to shop it around for a long time, and it just was not successful. And then eventually, I had some people read it. A lot of my family had read it early on; they loved it, and finally, a good friend of mine, Alexis, she did a beta read and really helped me make it a book that I liked. So it was like a book that I thought was fine, and then I got to a point where I liked it, and then when I worked with Alex, it became a situation where even though like all the plot and 90% of it is the same or more, just the edits that Alex kind of walked me through, it went from a book I like to I'm proud of this. Like I'm proud of putting this book out, which I needed to get there because it was my first book, and I self-published it. So it's like I gotta make sure I'm not just throwing junk out into the world. Like I'm proud of this book. I think it's good. I think it's really good, and so far people have been really receptive of it. So I guess that worked.
I don't know how people do it without that kind of relationship with their editor, to be honest with you, because I started out writing nonfiction. I had my business mentor is also a very good friend of mine and now a co-owner in a business with me. She's sold over 5 million books.
Wow.
She's a prolific writer. Her name's Honore Corder. If you guys are interested in looking her up, she's almost purely on the nonfiction side right now, but she helps people write books. So that's how I found her, and that's how we ended up getting to know each other and all the things. But if it wasn't for her and for my editor, Karen Hunsinger, on those books, I would have been in no man's land. Like, and even if it was a great write, to your point, even if I was writing a great book, I would have not really been able to verify or validate that without someone else that had a and not mom, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know you mentioned like, hey, your family reads my family reads my stuff, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. I'm like, I want to. Yes, I'm so glad you're saying that. I cannot wait to hear that from someone that's not my mom, right? Like,
Yeah, right.
or like my wife or whatever. Like, my wife is actually pretty critical of my stuff, which is fun. But with that relationship with your editor, I feel like that's probably the most critical
Yeah.
because there are a lot of editors who they're just there for line edits. They're like, yep. We don't really meet. We don't really talk.
Mm-hmm.
Line edit. Here's some stuff. Take them or leave them, whatever. And then there's a lot of edits who straddle the line between that and a good developmental editor. And then there's some people that are straight up book coaches while they're editing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I hired Zach Bohannon, because I needed that. I knew I needed that for the first fiction book, having experienced that with my multiple nonfiction efforts before that. So good for you. And I'm really excited to hear that it was Alex Woodrow, because I'm becoming very, very curious about the book she just released. I'm like, I've got it. I can't wait to read it. It's on my TBR. I'm bumping it up, There it is.
Yeah,
There
I
it
just got it in
is.
the mail yesterday. Finally.
Whisperwood.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it just came out, what, a week ago?
It came out the same day as Melon Heads, actually. So
Right.
yeah, a week and a half ago. Something.
Yeah, a week and a half. So I was on the pre-order for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got it. I just haven't, I got to get to the book, and I've got to read Melonhead first because I promised myself I would.
Well, it's a quick read. So
Yeah. So, do you think that covers the question? Like, what did you learn about yourself and writing while you wrote Curse Corvus?
yeah, I maybe just to kind of tie a bow around that question. I wrote it in summer. It's been a little okay. So the day I started writing Curse Corvus was April 25th, 2020, and then I released the final version April 25th, 2023. So it was exactly a 3-year journey from starting to write it to publishing it. And
Wow.
in 3 years is a long time, especially when those, I've been changing so much as a writer, and just the more words you write, the more you learn and just and become your future self, right? Your future
Sure.
writer self. And so, yeah, that whole process of like those early drafts and facing a lot of rejection with it, and just kind of deciding that no, I really like what's here, and I think with help from the right people, it can be something I'm proud of, and it did become that. And you know, I have experience with publishing with the Dreadstone Press, and so I thought I'm going to self-publish this. Like I want to get this book out there, and I know that I'm going to put in the effort to make sure that it is not only a story but a book, a physical product that I'm proud of, and I think I accomplished that, and it was a lot of work, but it was worth it, and it's been really fun to see people post pictures about it, talk about it, and a lot of people like, oh, I read it in like a day, or read it in 2 days, and I love that. Like that, not every book needs to be like that, but I like to think that I write books that are fairly quick reads and fun to read, and hopefully there's more than that. But if I can hit those first two things and people are glad they read it, then I couldn't possibly complain.
Well, I love that you bring that up for several reasons, but one of which is I did find, on my notes about the book, I thought that you had excellent chapter length
Mm,
for someone that wants that kind of quick punch, because
yes.
I've been literally reading this between other things, right? Which is not necessarily when we're writing, we're like, oh, people are going to enjoy this, they're going to immerse, and the reality is like sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. But you actually facilitate both types of readers, right? So you wrote a book where the chapter length to me is kind of ideal.
Yeah.
It moves quickly, but it doesn't feel like you're like speeding through.
Yeah.
The
Thank you.
chapters aren't, yeah, they're not annoyingly short. Like sometimes like it's people go a little overboard. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
dude, it's like a page, right? Come on. It's like, that's
Mhm.
not a real chapter. But these were really appropriately length. They kept the story moving very well. If you're a quick read, this will be a quick read. If you're like me and you stew a little bit, I like to taste my stories as I'm consuming them. It is nice because you can spend that time with a chapter instead of a fraction of a chapter because of
Yeah.
the way it's written.
Yeah. And I did that by design because that's what I like to read,
Mm.
is that style. And a kind of a testament to that whole thing, in addition to your own that you just gave me, my coworker, who is not a reader at all, bought the book just to be supportive, and decided he wanted to read it at work in front of me, like 20 feet away from me, and which was just quite the experience. I'm just like sitting there and look over, and he's like got it up, and he'll ask me questions about it. It's like, oh, it's not necessarily ideal, but he ended up he finished it and he really liked it, but he loved the chapter length because he's not a reader, and so like
Mhm.
it was easy for him to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and read a chapter and just be able to set it down and pick it up the next day. Like that worked for him. um I've been there even as someone who likes to read. Sometimes you pick up a book, you see the chapter's 25 pages long, and you go, yeah, maybe I'll come back to it later. I don't
Right.
You just don't even start it. And so if I can see, oh, it's like a 6 pages, like, yeah, I can knock this out in the time that I have. And I like that's kind of my personal preference. So I wanted to, in that case, I write what I like to read.
I thought it was awesome. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome, and thank you.
All right. So something I observed in the book that I also thought very positively of is something I've become a lot more aware of as I've been writing predominantly female characters.
Mm,
I just find myself drawn to um, writing stories that have more female characters than men. In fact, my entire trilogy I'm writing is almost all female characters. Every lead in this story is a female character. And I was very aware and sensitive to how, when I started this, like what I was undertaking. I was like, okay, this is going to be something I have to be really sensitive to because obviously, I'm not a woman. And to be able to write in, in that perspective that much is going to be really challenging. I thought, of course, this is from another guy. I
yeah.
thought you did such a great job of that in Curse Corvus. Almost, you were so good about writing from Lindsay's perspective that I kind of laughed or smiled several times while sitting in my chair reading. And my wife's like, "What's so funny?" And I'm like, "God, he nailed like these little parts in this story. He did so well. Like I was actually picking up some some lessons there. Like I need to focus on that a little bit more in my projection of my characters, because I just thought you did such a wonderful job of writing in such a you have a very beautiful way of writing, but at
Thank
the
you.
same time, it's also very clean and simple, which is very good because it doesn't slow the reader.
Mhm.
It's more accessible. I thought it was really good, but the way you put everything together outside of her and then inside of her, I thought
Mhm.
just was so well done. So
Thank you.
yeah, thanks
Oh,
for inspiring my treatment of some of my characters. I
yeah,
was
of
like,
course.
need to get on my game a little bit with that. So.
Well, yeah, I'll speak to a couple points that you just made there. So, like on the style of writing, I for a while I thought it was I struggled with my author voice and what I was writing and felt like I wasn't I don't know I didn't think I had that great of an author voice, and I just wasn't sure I was writing that nice of prose, and I like to read authors that are really good like really good at the at word choice and the way they command the English language. And so I really respect that, but I thought I was failing, and what took me far too long to understand was that my what I write is just different than what a lot of what a lot that I like to read, and trying to lean into that. And so yeah, that clean and simple, but not basic, right? Like there's a balance there, and I think I'm leaning into that middle ground of um,
Oh yeah.
somewhat intellectual writing, but it's still it's clean and accessible, and and I think it does make for quicker read. I think that's a large factor in why both Curse Corvus and Melonhead, from the people that have read it that I've heard from, have read it quickly, and I like that. You know, I've mentioned before, I really like that. So I think that I'm becoming happier with the way that I write and understanding it's not a negative. It's just and maybe it started as a limitation, but that's how I write, and so you know I need to lean into that.
No, I really enjoyed it actually. Um, I found it to be great. And to me, these topics are always so subjective, right? It's like
Yeah.
you get your purists. You had mentioned earlier, there's no musts.
Yeah.
There's like no defined ways. So as a professor, I would tell my students, particularly my undergrads, like there's no absolutes, right? Like
Mhm.
you have to be more open than that, which is fun talking to people that are studying engineering because some of them immediately get that, and others are like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But the moral of the story is, I think that a lot of this is in the eye of the reader, right? It's
Mhm.
like they either take to that or they don't. The thing that always gets to me is I can identify pretty quickly if someone's writing style is going to be a distraction for
Mhm.
me, and you're absolutely on the opposite end of that world, right? You are not a distraction. Your writing was very easy to take in, but that's a compliment. I think it was really a testament to how much time you spent choosing your words wisely.
Yeah. Thank you. I
Yep.
appreciate that.
It
I mean,
shows effort because it's a lot
a lot of
easier to
work went into
screw that up than it is to get it right. So I think,
But then just real quick, the female perspective thing, I just wanted to say that it is very challenging, and I wouldn't claim to be a professional at it, but I will credit the people around me, specifically in terms of Curse Corvus. I mean, I based it off of my sister and roommate, their experience, and the characters themselves are very different, but you know, they the type of people that they are, I could build off of that, and I see it firsthand. And same goes with my mom and wife, of course. And so like I have a lot of women around me that I can see that, and I feel like I am getting close to showing what feels authentic, and also having a very close friend and trusted beta reader who was a woman who would not. I think what's her phrase? She wouldn't let me go out with like lettuce in my teeth or something. Yeah, so basically saying like she's gonna read it, and she wouldn't, if it was a problem, she wouldn't let me go on without addressing it. And I think that's important. That if you are gonna do that, you know, sensitivity readers for a variety of reasons exist, but that's a good one too. Make sure if you're writing all female characters, maybe don't only show it to your male friends and ask if it's okay. Like get some other perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to say that credit to all the women around me that have helped me shape that up.
Well, if I hadn't heard that story, my question would have been, did you have somebody that helped you? Because I was so impressed with how well you managed that I was going to ask that question. I was like,
Thanks.
wow, it's apparent to me, probably because I'm sensitive to it, but also because you did it so well. Um, to your point, I do the same thing with my wife. My wife is like my first line critic. So she's like, yeah, no, you messed this up. I'll be like, what did I do? Like, what did I miss? She's like, yeah, I would never, women, moms don't think like that. You're thinking like a dad.
Yeah.
This is about
It's
a mom.
it's so important to have those people who will just tell you straight, like,
Yep.
nope, no, that's not right. You need to change this.
Yeah.
And
There's
understand
times.
no hard feel like again, having like a trusted beta reader
Yeah.
is so important because you need someone that will give it to you straight and understand both sides. There should be no hard feelings. Like you're doing this because you are making sure I don't go out into the world with lettuce in my teeth, and I'm understanding that you are trying to help me. So it's so important, crucial.
Absolutely.